The call came at 6:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock on the microwave, thinking I still had 13 minutes before I needed to wake my daughter for school. I remember thinking how lucky I was. 13 whole minutes of quiet, just me and my coffee and the pale October light coming through the kitchen window. Then my phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm in that practiced way that emergency responders are trained to be. A car accident on Route 9. Near the overpass. My husband Daniel and our daughter Lily had been on their way to her weekend swim practice. A delivery truck had run a red light. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I don't remember parking. I have flashes: a sliding glass door, fluorescent lights, a nurse with red hair who kept saying my name like it was a question. What I remember clearly is the moment the doctor sat across from me in a small room with beige walls and a box of tissues on the table, and I understood from the way he folded his hands that he was not going to tell me good news. Daniel died on impact. My daughter Lily, 8 years old, still in her swim bag with her goggles around her wrist, was on life support with no brain activity. The doctor used words I had studied in my 2 years of nursing school before I dropped out to raise her. I understood every single one of them. I wished I didn't. Somewhere in the hours that followed, a woman from the organ donation team came to see me. She was gentle. She apologized before she even introduced herself. She told me there was no pressure, that whatever I decided was right, that there was no wrong answer. I sat with it for a long time. Lily had asked me once. She was 6. We had been watching a news segment about a little boy who received a new heart. She had tugged my sleeve and said, "Mom, if I died, could my heart go to someone else so they don't have to die too?" I had told her not to talk like that. I had kissed the top of her head and changed the channel. I signed the forms at 2 inches the morning. I want you to understand what those weeks after felt like, because I think people imagine grief as something soft, something that washes over you slowly. It isn't. It is blunt. It is a door slamming shut in a room where the air used to be warm. I went through the motions of planning 2 funerals simultaneously, answering sympathy cards, returning casserole dishes to neighbors whose names I could barely remember. I was 29 years old and I was a widow and I had no child, and I stood in the cereal aisle at the grocery store once and simply could not move for 15 minutes because Lily had loved the one with the yellow box. My sister came to stay for a while. My parents called every day. People were kind. But kindness doesn't stop the 3 a.m. hours. Nothing does. I went back to work after 3 months because I needed to not be alone in that apartment anymore. I was a medical billing specialist at a mid-sized clinic in Portland, Oregon, not glamorous, but steady, and I was good at it. I told myself I was rebuilding. Some days I almost believed it. What I didn't do was let go of the things that were hers. Her small blue raincoat still hung on the hook by the door. Her drawings were still taped to the refrigerator, a house with smoke coming out of the chimney, a horse she had drawn in crayon and colored purple because she said horses should be allowed to be purple if they wanted. I had framed that drawing. It sat on the bookshelf in the living room between a photo of our family at the Oregon coast and a ceramic owl she had picked out at a craft fair. The purple horse. I am telling you about it now because it matters. Because of what happened 11 years later in a house I had no business being in a city far from the one where I had built and lost my entire world. It took me a long time to understand that I was not going to recover my old life. I tried. I stayed in Portland for 4 years after the accident, then moved to Seattle, thinking the change would help, then to Sacramento after a relationship that didn't work out left me feeling hollowed in a different way. I was competent at my job. I had friends. I went on trips, I read books, I signed up for a pottery class once and actually enjoyed it. But there was always this, I don't know how to say this without sounding dramatic, this frequency I couldn't tune out. The awareness that some piece of Lily was still somewhere in the world, beating inside a body I had never seen. The donation team had told me I could request updates through an anonymous registry. They couldn't share identifying information without consent from both parties, but a recipient family could choose to write. In the first year, I checked my mailbox like it contained something precious. Nothing came. In the second year, I checked less. By year 5, I had almost stopped believing it ever would. Then I moved to Phoenix. It was not a city I had ever imagined living in. I went because a friend of a friend knew of a position, and because I was 38 and tired of reinventing myself in the Pacific time zone, and because the desert in spring is genuinely beautiful in a way that surprised me. I took a job as an administrative coordinator at a private residential care facility, upscale, the kind of place where the rooms have real art on the walls and the staff is expected to dress professionally even when they're filing paperwork. The pay was decent, the work was quiet. I kept my head down. I had been there 8 months when the facility took on a new resident, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patricia Holt, 81, moving in from a home in Scottsdale after a fall. I processed her intake paperwork. I noted her emergency contacts, her insurance information, the name of the family member who had signed the admission forms. Her son. A man named Owen Holt. I don't know why I paused on the name. It was not an unusual name. I set the file aside and went about my day. The following Wednesday, Owen Holt came in to check on his mother and sign some updated insurance forms. I was at the front desk. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-30s, wearing a gray jacket and carrying a paper coffee cup, looking slightly distracted in the way people do when they're managing a parent's care from a distance. He gave me his name, I pulled the forms, we went through the routine. And then he looked up at me with those light brown eyes and said, "I'm sorry, this might sound strange, do I know you from somewhere?" I told him I didn't think so. He apologized, said he was probably misremembering, and we finished the paperwork. He thanked me and left. I sat very still for a moment after he was gone. There was nothing remarkable about that exchange. People say, "Do I know you?" all the time. I shook it off and answered a phone call and did not think about it again until he came back the following week and brought his mother a small potted succulent for her room, and she reached up and patted his cheek and called him her heart, and he laughed and said, literally, "Mom." I don't know what made me ask the nurse later what that meant. I framed it as small talk. "Mrs. Holt's son seems close to her, is he local?" The nurse told me he was, that he'd grown up partly in Phoenix, that he'd had some health issues when he was young, a heart transplant as a child, but he was healthy now, ran marathons. You would never know. I walked to the bathroom and locked the door and sat on the edge of the sink and pressed both hands flat against the counter. You would never know. Lily had been 8. Owen Holt looked to be in his mid-30s. The math, I did it without meaning to, in the fraction of a second. Before I could stop myself, the math was possible. I need to be honest with you about what happened next inside me, because I have thought about it many times since. It was not a clean feeling. It was not simply joy or wonder. It was terrifying. It was the sensation of a door I had sealed very carefully beginning to open from the other side, and not knowing whether what was behind it would save me or undo me entirely. I told myself I didn't know anything. I told myself there were thousands of pediatric heart transplants every year. I told myself that going down this road could lead nowhere and would cost me whatever equilibrium I had managed to build. I went home, made dinner, watched something on television that I cannot now recall, and lay awake until 4 a.m. doing math on the ceiling. I want to tell you that I was calm and rational about what happened next. I was not. I contacted the donor registry. I had not reached out in years, but my account was still active, and I submitted a request to update my contact information and indicate that I was open to contact. The process was exactly as slow as bureaucratic processes are. I waited. I tried not to think about it constantly, and failed. 3 weeks later, I received an email. It was from a woman who identified herself only as the mother of a recipient. She said she had registered years ago but had struggled with whether to make contact. She said her son knew his heart had come from a donor and had always wanted to say thank you, but that they hadn't known how to begin. She said she hoped this message found me well. She had not used her name. She had not used her son's name. There was nothing in the message that confirmed or denied anything. I wrote back the same evening. I told her I was glad she reached out. I told her I had been thinking about taking this step for a long time. I told her, and this part I wrote and deleted and rewrote twice, that I hoped her son was healthy and loved, and that he was living a full life, because that was all I had ever wanted. The correspondence moved slowly, the way trust builds slowly. Over 6 weeks, we exchanged perhaps a dozen emails. We did not share last names, we did not share cities. We shared, carefully and then less carefully, pieces of ourselves. She told me her son had grown up loving the outdoors, that he had struggled in school for a while but found his footing, that he was kind in the specific way, that people are kind when they have known difficulty. I told her about Lily. Not everything, not all at once. But I told her about the crayon horse. I told her that Lily had asked me once whether her heart could help someone if she ever died, and that I thought about that conversation often, that it was the thing I came back to when the grief felt like it had no bottom. There was a pause of several days after that message. I was afraid I had said too much. Then she replied. She said, "My son would very much like to meet you, if you're willing. He asked me to tell you something." When he was recovering from his surgery as a child, there was a small drawing in a clear plastic bag with his personal effects, a crayon drawing of a purple horse. The hospital staff thought it might have been accidentally included from another patient and asked if we wanted to return it, but my son refused to let it go. He's had it ever since. It's been in every apartment he's ever lived in. I read that email 4 times. The 5th time, I started crying and didn't stop for a long time. We met on a Saturday morning at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix, a neutral place, public, with good light. I arrived early. I sat at a corner table and watched the door and tried to remember how to breathe normally. When Owen Holt walked in, he was not with his mother. He was alone, and he looked nervous in the precise way I felt nervous, and when he saw me, he stopped in the doorway for just a moment before crossing the room. He sat down across from me. We looked at each other. He said, "I thought it might be you. From the facility. I thought you seemed familiar the first time I saw you, but I couldn't explain why." I said I didn't know what to say to that. He said, "I've been thinking about this moment since I was about 12 years old. I imagined it 100 different ways, and I don't think any of them were like this." I asked him what this was like. He thought about it, he said. Like something that was always going to happen finally did. We talked for almost 4 hours. We talked about Lily. I showed him photos on my phone, my daughter at the beach, at her swim meets, making a face at the camera the way she always did because she thought serious photos were boring. He looked at each one carefully, the way you look at something you have been trying to understand for a long time. He told me that after his surgery, there had been a period where he had vivid dreams he couldn't explain, not scary ones, but strange, warm ones, where he was near water and someone was laughing. He had always assumed they were just his brain adjusting. His mother thought they might be something else. I told him about the purple horse drawing. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It was a framed crayon drawing a horse, lopsided and cheerful, the body purple with a yellow mane. The paper had yellowed at the edges. It was hanging on the wall of what appeared to be a small apartment. I put my hand over my mouth. He said, quietly, "I never knew where it came from exactly, but I knew it meant something. I kept it because it felt like something I was supposed to keep. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, but I'm not sure language works for it. It was not the same as having Lily back. Nothing will ever be that. But it was the feeling of a circle closing. Of something sent out into the world a long time ago in the worst moment of your life, returning to you in a form you did not expect but somehow recognize." I reached across the table and we held onto each other's hands, this stranger, who was not a stranger, and we cried a little, and the coffee shop kept going around us, indifferent and ordinary, and that was okay. Some moments don't need ceremony. There are things I want you to know about what happened after. Owen's mother, when I finally met her properly, not as a resident's family member, but as herself, embraced me in the parking lot of the facility before I could say anything, and held on for a long time, and when she let go, her eyes were wet, and she said thank you, in a way that made me understand she had been waiting years to say it directly to someone. I told her she didn't need to thank me. I told her what I always believed, that Lily made that choice herself, in her own words, before she could have known she was making it. I was just the person who remembered and signed the forms. Owen and I meet for coffee most weeks now. It is not a strange relationship, though I understand why it might sound like one. I think the word is chosen. He did not replace Lily. He is not a substitute or a symbol. He is a person who carries something precious inside him and who treats that fact with the same seriousness and tenderness that I always hoped someone would. He runs marathons. He volunteers on weekends with a youth swimming program, which I did not tell him Lily swam competitively until after he mentioned it. And when I did tell him, we both went quiet for a moment and then agreed that some things are too much to analyze and maybe should just be accepted as grace. Last spring, together with his mother and my sister who flew down from Seattle, we set up a small scholarship fund in Lily's name through the hospital's Pediatric Care Foundation, a few $100s a year, nothing grand, directed toward families who can't afford the out-of-pocket costs after a pediatric transplant. We called it the Lily Marsh Fund. It was Owen's idea. He said it was the least he could do. I told him he didn't owe me anything. He said, I know. That's why I want to do it. I drive home sometimes through the part of Phoenix where the light goes orange and flat at dusk and the desert opens up wide, and I think about the version of me who sat in that hospital room at 2 a.m. with a pen in my hand and made a decision in the dark. I think about what she could not have known. I think about the purple horse in a crinkled plastic bag tucked in with the belongings of a child she never met. Grief doesn't end. I don't want you to hear this story and think it does. I still have the yellow cereal box moments. I still reach for my phone sometimes to tell Lily something funny before I remember. I still sleep with the ceramic owl on my nightstand. But something shifted the morning I sat across from Owen Holt in a corner booth and watched him look at photos of my daughter with the careful attention of someone who understood, on some wordless level, exactly who she was. She gave him her heart. I think, in some way, I am still learning to understand. He gave me a piece of mine back. If you are an organ donor, thank you. If you're not sure yet, I hope this found you at the right moment, and if you are somewhere out there carrying grief that feels like it has no end, I see you. I spent 11 years thinking I would feel this way forever. I don't anymore.